So we will be recording this lecture. Thank you for joining us, and I'd like to introduce Laura Burns, who will introduce our speaker and presentation for today. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today, Vasudha Narayan, and she's going to talk about Angkor Wat and other Hindu temples. She is a distinguished professor in the Department of Religion at the University of Florida, and she's past president of the American Academy of Religion. She was educated at the universities of Madras and Bombay in India and at Harvard University. She's really done extensive work. She's the author or editor of 7 books and numerous articles, chapters of books, and encyclopedia entries. In addition, she's also the associate editor of the 6-volume Brill's Encyclopedia of Hinduism. And her research has been supported by grants and fellowships from several organizations. And I'm not going to list all of them. It's a long, long list. And I must say that as a docent at the Harm Museum for many years, the other docents and I were always delighted when she came to talk to us about Indian art and culture, because she had such insightful comments. And I think you'll have the same feeling today, that you're going to go away having new ways of seeing things than you might have had before. So I'm going to turn it over to you now. So it's up to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you today. And I sincerely regret it's not in person, so I can see all of you. Do I have 45 minutes, Laura?
Yes, that would be fine. And then time for question and answer at the end.
Okay. Let me get to my share screen. You will give me a minute. Sorry, I can't seem to find my, oh. I apologize. I seem to have closed out my PowerPoint window when I last shared my screen. That's why I couldn't find it. And I'll get it to you, get it out in a minute. Okay, here we are in business. Can you see my slide?
Yes, it's beautiful.
Okay, good. Thank you. This is Angkor Wat at sunrise. It's a west-facing temple. So as you're looking at it, the sun is rising directly behind the temple. I'll come to Angkor in a few minutes, but today I'll start off with India, where you find the earliest history of temples. Just to give myself some kind of anchor, I decided to get my talk woven around heritage sites, UNESCO heritage sites. Not because it is the only way to do it, or even the most important way of doing it, the best way of doing it, but it gives you a sense that most of the monuments I'll be showing today have been recognized as masterpieces of human endeavor. There are, of course, innumerable World Heritage sites, about 1,200 plus. Arguably, a lot of this is politically skewed. So some countries get to have many more than the others. For instance, right now, China has overtaken many of the European countries, but in earlier times, the European countries, especially Italy, was way ahead of most other countries. India has 38 sites, and that includes, of course, Islamic, Buddhist, and other kinds of institutions. Plus, of course, other like national parks, which I'd love to do some other time. But today, just to keep myself focused, I'm sticking to a few Hindu sites, World Heritage sites, and some nearby, and then move on to Cambodia. Within that, I'll be primarily focusing on Hindu temples, particularly those which have been recognized as having artistic merit. Some have devotional value, and that's a whole bunch of them. But today I'm going with those which are a little bit more recognized as masterpieces of world architecture. I start off though with a more secular site. This goes back, before I do that, I wanted to give you a list of all the religions that we do find in India. Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism, which began in the 6th century BC. Christianity came in the 1st century CE. Islam in the 7th, 8th centuries. Zoroastrianism, the Parsis live in India, and Sikhism. The earliest, the oldest of all the UNESCO World Heritage Sites is in the Bhimbetka Caves in Madhya Pradesh. Some parts of it go before 6000 BCE. Arguably, it's not a religious site. We don't even know what religion they practiced then. But interestingly enough, we find beautiful images of human beings locked arm. And it's just a lovely picture, almost like a United Nations New Year card. And it's beautiful to see people dancing around with their arms interlocked. You also find people, sketches of people hunting. And we do get a sense of their lifestyle looking at these sketches from the caves. Nearby, near the Bhimbetka Caves, is a Buddhist monument. And this is just the one Buddhist monument I'll be showing today, just because it's so spectacular. It's called the Sanchi Stupa. A stupa is a place where some relic of the Buddha used to be kept. Today, it's any place of holy worship. And this was built starting with the 3rd century BCE. What do I say starting to be built? Well, most Hindu temples or Buddhist temples are never completed. They're always in the state of becoming and being. And it is here that Gautama the Buddha is honored. Gautama was born in what we would call today in hindsight, a Hindu community. The word Hindu was not present in those times. The word Hindu was used more as a geographic word in the early centuries BCE. It's more like saying Floridian. So anyone who lived east of the river Indus, Sindhu, was called Indu. The word Indus the river Indus was called Sindhu. And so Indu became a name of a native of the subcontinent. Eventually, the Buddha got enlightenment and his followers started the religion that we call Buddhism today. The Buddha's teaching was that life is suffering, the cause of suffering is desire, and elimination of desire leads to nirvana. It is this teaching which is honored here in the Buddhist stupa. Today, Buddhism is dead in India, almost. We have a couple of million, what we call new Buddhists, that is, people who converted to Buddhism in the last century. But Buddhism pretty much died out as a living religion in India by about the 13th, 14th century CE. The doorways, the gateways here are inscribed with the life of the Buddha and pictures of the patrons. It's a site of pilgrimage today, and the pilgrim and Buddhist monks from all over East Asia come there. Near the Sanchi Stupa is a monument that was erected circa 150 BCE. Do we have temples going back then that early? Not that are extant anyway. It's possible that they were built then, but cave art was probably more. But words for temple occur in Sanskrit literature. Why aren't they here anymore? Because more likely than not, they were built with perishable materials. But this monument, a pillar, was set up by a Greek who identifies himself, interestingly enough, as a follower of the Hindu god called Vishnu. And on top of the pillar is an eagle, which is an emblem of the Hindu god Vishnu. And the history of the pillar, today it's called Kambastamba. It was set up, it says right there, in honor of the god Vishnu. Also nearby, and I threw this in because in the same area of Bhimbetka caves and the column, you find ruins of a temple. This temple from the 11th century, and I put it in out of chronological order, out of sequence, simply because it's beautiful. And it's one of my favorite pieces. This is called the archway, which holds a swing. Swings are common in India. If you look back, you can see one at the back of my home in the living room. But likely as not, this is probably a gateway. This temple was dedicated again to the Hindu god Vishnu, and it has manifestations of his many incarnations out here. So what do we call the word? What's the word for incarnation? The word is avatar, which has now passed on to popular culture, avatar, as in the name that people take on when they play computer games. But avatar literally meant a descent of the divine into earth. And how many incarnations are there of Vishnu? According to one text, innumerable. Some bring it down to 24, others to about 10. The first incarnation is as a fish. The story goes that at one point, everyone in the world was really bad, except one family. And so when Manu, this holy man, was taking a bath in a lake, a fish comes to him and says, "Take me home." And the fish grows in size every day. And then suddenly the fish tells this man, Manu, "Build yourself a big boat. Put your family and the seeds of all animals in it. It's going to rain and rain, and it's going to be a big flood. So anchor the boat to me, the fish, and I'll ride through the flood." So that's the first incarnation. And this goes back to the archetypal flood stories you find in many cultures. So that's the first one that you find here in this building. There are many other incarnations, including one as a turtle, and then half man, half animal, and so on. This temple, like many others in India, has erotic sculptures. And the question of why we have erotic sculptures in the building meant for spiritual upliftment is a question that we can discuss later on. The quickest answer I can give you is that within Hinduism, sex or sensual pleasure is not considered to be bad. Some texts say it's bad, but many texts say it's fine as long as you can call it quits at a certain point. In other words, do not indulge too much in anything. Pursuit of wealth and power, sensual pleasure, anything. In limitation, it's fine, the middle path. We move on to the south of India to some of the earliest examples of temples in the 7th century CE. It's a port city called Mahabalipuram. Because it was a port town, it is probably from here that the ships sailed to Southeast Asia. And when we go to Angkor, you'll see a great similarity and many differences from the Hindu temples. It's right on the Bay of Bengal. And this is called the Shore Temple. It's still crude. You can see the stone. It's made out of stone and it's right on the shores. That's why it's called the Shore Temple. And many of the monolithic sculptures were experimented upon here. Again, here in this set of sculptures, we find the 10 incarnations of Vishnu. This particular sculpture is called The Descent of the Ganges, and it shows the descent of the river into the earth. Many of these sculptures had a kind of punning, a visual punning. So the same sculpture, if you see it in a particular way, would tell you one story. If you see it in a different way, you'd have a different story. Mahabalipuram, which you just saw here, the kings of this country on the shores of the Bay of Bengal were constantly picking fights with the kingdom called the Chalukya kingdom in the Deccan Peninsula. That's where the arrow points. And so because of the war, there was a great deal of interchange. And here in Patadakal, the capital of the Chalukya Empire, we find the cradle of Indian temple building. Many of the temples are located on the banks of rivers, or if you don't find natural phenomena with water near lakes or anything like that, they build a big tank. And here, these temples are now part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. This looks like a neighborhood. It's kind of half the size of Hale Plantation. But if you go there, instead of homes, you find different temples. And you may wonder, why did they build temples next door to each other? And it's probably because the two queens who were building them were experimenting with different styles. It's from here, from the beginning of the 8th century, that we begin to see two distinctive modes of Indian architecture, North Indian and South Indian. The North Indian spires are curvy linear, we call them, and the South are more angular. On the ceilings, it's kind of like looking up at the Sistine Chapel, but here on the ceiling, you find elaborate sculptures, huge experiments here, and almost lacework kinds of sculpturing. Imagine taking a piece of rock and just carving this kind of stuff out. You can't even press a delete button. This is an example of what eventually becomes North Indian sculptural tower. The tower is kind of curved and it's not angular, but this becomes distinctive in many parts of Northern India. But in Southern India, it becomes more flat. And I'll show you some examples soon. Now we've fast forwarded into about the 10th century CE. I'm going to show you a very different kind of sculpture now. So far, you've been looking at towers rising up into the sky, and you can understand, yes, that's surely something I can understand because we are aspiring to the heavens. But the stepwells go down deep, deep into the ground, many of them 80, 100 feet deep. This is one of the earliest stepwells I know. It's near it's in a state called Rajasthan in northwest of India. You can see it already northwest. It was built between the 9th and the 10th century CE. And you can see how exquisite it looks, going deep, deep down. And there are steps leading down into the well. Strictly speaking, this is not a well, they call it, because it's not a spring inside. It's more like a tank. but you can walk in, it's a good 5 degrees cooler by the time you get to the water below. And you can't go below this, the fence that's down there. On one side, you find a palace with carvings, and the other side are just the steps where people could sit down on summer and enjoy the cool breeze. There are many step temples built, and by this time, temples were being built with some idea of astronomical configuration. What do I mean by that? By this time, well, certainly by the 5th century CE, works in astronomy in in India had figured out the movement of the sun, the moon, the earth, and so on. And so they had a date for the summer, and well, think of Stonehenge. So they had dates for the equinoxes, the solstices, and so on. It was not only important for harvesting and for agriculture, it was also important for them for religious rituals. So there are many sun temples. I'll show you just 2 of them in India. And when we go to Angkor Wat, that also is a kind of a sun temple, but dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu. Modera is in the state of Gujarat. It was built in the 11th century. And again, you find the stepwell here. So that's the continuation of the stepwell motif. And a carving of the Hindu god Vishnu. The name Vishnu means all-pervasive. And he is reclining, if you see carefully, on a 5 or 7-hooded serpent. The serpent is not a bad guy in Hindu art. Sometimes he is, but very often he's good. And the serpent is called Ananta. Ananta means without end. It means infinite. So you can, very often people think of the snake as being eternal and having a long life. And here too, the 7 hoods of the snake, Ananta, shows the infinity of time. So just looking at this particular image, people got to sense immediately of Vishnu, all-pervasive, that is master of space, reclining on the coils of time. So Ananta, infinity, so master of space and time immediately. It's kind of a telegraphic kind of image, like a hologram, giving an idea of the supremacy of this deity. More stepwells in Modera, and this is the Sun Temple. Again, on spring and autumn equinoxes, the rising sun would go directly through the doorway and shine on the deity inside. And on the solstices, or at midday, this temple wouldn't throw a shadow anywhere. They kind of built it such that its shadow would fall on itself in an interesting way. Stories from Indian narratives, from Indian epics, and the Indian deities were all carved on the sides of these temples. It's like lace work, pretty much. This is a small sculpture on the side. Notice it, and I'll come back to it later. It's called the churning of the ocean of milk. And it's a particular story that I'll come back to later. But this story is very important in Angkor and in Cambodia, a very minor story in India itself. It speaks about the devas, that's the good guys, the divine beings. The word deva and divine are connected. They all go back to the same Indo-European language family, where div, to shine, becomes significant. So divine, deva, are similar. There are many words like that. The word for wisdom, knowledge in India, in Sanskrit, is jnana. And you find that in gnosis, lack of knowledge, ignorance, and so on. So all these words go back to the same Indian family, Indo-European family. Here, the devas were being terrorized by the nasty guys, the asuras or demons. And Vishnu, the god whom they go to for help, tells them to seek the help of the asuras and churn the ocean of milk. And eventually he says, you will get the nectar of immortality. And this is the holy grail, of course, that you find in many world civilizations, many culture, the well of immortality, the nectar of immortality. And so they churn the ocean of milk, and that story becomes a very significant one in Cambodia. Rounding up the step wells, one of the largest ones, and one of the latest ones to be inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, is this one called the step well of the Queen, Rani Ki Vav, and it is enormous. Again, nothing above, you're looking down. So this temple was built, this step well was built in the 11th century and added in 2014. And you can see it's about 64 meters long and 27 meters deep. As you keep going down, each floor, you find more and more carvings, intricate carvings, shrines, and the 10 incarnations of Vishnu come back here, many of the deities. And this particular stepwell was covered up with silt and sand, and this, quote unquote, discovered only a few years before. I mean, it was a magnificent site, completely lost over the centuries and built, dug up only recently. It's a magnificent piece. You can see these works of art, not above you, but as you're going below. And you may wonder why, what's going on here? And the idea is one can think of it both as going up, rising up to the heavens. Your spirit is soaring into the heavens. Or another way of looking upon it in Hindu ways of thinking is to plumb deep inside yourself, inside your soul, to realize the divinity within yourself and within all human beings. As you go down, you see stories beloved in the Hindu tradition. The one on the left shows the goddess called Durga slaying, killing a demon called the buffalo demon. There's a magnificent version of this sculpture at the Han Museum. I'd love you to go and see it. The buffalo is a symbol of sloth, stupor, avarice, all things bad within Hinduism. Having said that, I'll say we have innumerable buffaloes, real ones in India. And so a piece of trivia here, we have probably one of the largest producers of mozzarella cheese because of that, interestingly enough. But back to the story, it is said that the buffalo demon lusts after the goddess, wants to marry her, and she says, no way. And the fight ensues for 9 nights. And on the 10th victorious day, she kills him. This is marked by a big Hindu ritual called Navaratri, 9 nights. And generally, at least except for every 2 or 3 years, these 9 nights coincide with Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, that cycle. And the reason it does not coincide every third year or fourth year is because we adjust this lunar calendar with the solar calendar. So we come one lunar cycle later. But here we see the goddess with multiple arms slaying the buffalo demon. On the right, a simple everyday scene, secular scene, a woman putting her earrings on. And you find the sacred and the secular combined in many of these temples. So here we have the downward going way of the step well. The day I went, it was deserted, absolutely. So it was beautiful. Close up of some of the sculptures and so on. We'll be rounding up on India fairly soon with 13th century. The great Chola temples of South India. By this time, temple building had taken off. You had huge ones going up, but notice in this one, we have a little wheel on the bottom right-hand corner. Why? Because many of the temples by this time were considered to be chariots. Chariots leading you to the divine. So the temple itself is a portal. It's liminal. On the one hand, it houses the deity. And this deity is completely fully God according to the Hindu tradition, or many sections within the Hindu tradition. I can't generalize about all of the Hindu tradition. But notice the wheel here. And I'll come back to this wheel in a minute. And here, picking up on the Sun Temple we saw a few minutes back, another Sun Temple, this time on the eastern seaboard. And this time, definitely built like a chariot to the sun god. The different doors here, the gateways were aligned again such that the sun came in on one equinox through one doorway and the other equinox through the other. But notice the wheels here. The Sun Temple was built with all these wheels below to show the pathway of the sun through the heavens. The smaller circles within here hold erotic sculpture, a sign of fertility, fecundity, regeneration, rebirth. And the universe is constantly being reborn. So this is the sun god. And he is wearing on the left-hand side, if you notice carefully, boots, which are very unusual in the Hindu civilization, Hindu culture, because you remove your footwear anywhere you go. But the boots, which look like leather boots, are probably a signature from the Persian artists, sculptors who came here to carve these Hindu gods. Again, more erotic sculpture, and here a small carving of the churning of the ocean of milk, which is the focus of my research in Angkor. By the 15th, 16th centuries, more chariots, more gods. Hampi was a huge city, a metropolitan city in South India. Many world travelers came here and they wrote extensive information about the city, how the roads were literally paved with gold. And so there are many travelogues of European travelers coming here in the 15th and 16th centuries. These pillars are unique in many parts, but you find them in a few parts of South India. How are they unique? Not just for the carving, but because they're musical pillars. You strike any of them and you'll find one note of the musical scale. So you can literally, like a xylophone, hit them and you can hear them. And that's someone hitting them to show how it's going on. And school kids love picnics here, of course, on these sites which show stories from the Hindu monument, epics. Some of the earliest caves nearby, near Hampi, are Badami caves, and the temples are here. The swastika, by the way, was a very, very holy symbol, and still is a very holy symbol for Hindus, Jains, and Buddhists. The word swasti means well-being. Su asti means su is good, asti is health, to be. Swasti is good health. Swastika meant well-being. And the word swastika comes in an Indian epic around 300 BCE, at least, the word swastika. But the symbol appears as early as the Indus Valley civilization, way back in 3000 BCE. So you find it even now, well, apart from all these, the architecture here, you find it in wedding invitations, painted outside homes, and so on. And Hindus are truly bewildered that they absolutely cannot use this holy symbol for them in this country or anywhere else because it's such a symbol of hate and associated with all the negative energies completely. Just to show you one living temple, the Meenakshi temple, this corridor was built in the 17th century, but the temple itself goes back at least a millennium. Huge corridors are within the temple, all carved with beautiful sculptures and a temple tank. Latest architecture, Baha'i temple. Moving on to Southeast Asia, and I hope to take, if you don't mind, an extra 5 minutes here or 10 minutes. How did the culture move? We think globalization happened yesterday. Well, starting with, ever since you can imagine, we have spices and textiles traveling. And so by 300 BCE, we're already finding, 300 BC, we're already finding Roman coins in the southern tip of Vietnam. So people have been traveling all over, and the exchange of spices and the exchange of, and the bartering with textiles have been a mover of culture. None of our cultures are pure. We've been borrowing like crazy from other people. There's a whole story in there. What is borrowing? What is co-opting? What is simply taking without heed for the origin civilization? Again, to keep my lecture focused, I'll be looking at not just all of Southeast Asia, but the Khmer Empire. If you look on the right-hand map, the dark pink shows the Khmer Empire in the 12th century. It takes up parts of Myanmar, Vietnam, parts of Thailand, parts of Laos, and parts of Malaysia, and of course, all of Cambodia. Look to the left now, and the small peach-colored country is Cambodia. Very much smaller than the original Khmer Empire. So when I look at the Khmer art, I'll be looking at countries which are not, or areas, lands, which are not in Cambodia anymore, or which may be disputed territory. So the earliest, we find some of the earliest temples is actually in Laos. It's in a place called Wat Phu, beautiful place. You you go to a border town in Thailand, cross the Mekong River, and you're in Wat Phu. And here we find a dilapidated Shiva temple going back to the 7th century. I had gone there because this had a churning of the ocean of milk carved out there. And I'd been chasing them all over Southeast Asia. So you can see how small Cambodia is. Notice the green dot. It's called Pre Vihir Temple, and I'll come to it in a minute after showing you one other temple. In Cambodia, oh, it was so hard to choose slides from here because it's like trying to pick among your own kids and say, which ones are my favorite? And they're all my favorite. So that's why I use this artificial criterion of having the UNESCO World Heritage Site. And there are 3 of them inscribed on the list from Cambodia. The earliest one, going back to the 6th century, oops, a typo here, the 6th century CE, is called the Sambar Pre Cook. Dilapidated today, but originally a thriving capital. And I kind of speak about this because when you look back, the area is vast and it looks like ruins today. But at one point, when you look at the inscriptions, you realize that there were so many thousands of people living here. It was a bustling town, colorful. Angkor itself, the Angkor area, which I'll come to in a minute, at its peak in the 12th, 13th centuries, had 1 million people. It was like, folks, if this was like New York in those days. I mean, people came there from all over the place. This is Sambar Pre Cook. Today, it's covered with these kinds of trees. And people are slowly taking them out. It was demined about 10 or 15 years, just a little before I went there, actually. So it's, in most places I went to, it would say you're entering mined area in the early days. Now, a lot of things have been cleared up. And of course, the Angkor area is completely tourist safe. So here, in many of the areas, it's marked with signs from the Halo Trust. That's Princess Diana's outfit. And I usually went with a local policeman or little children. They knew where the mines were buried and they could take me around. So we go to the place called Pre Vihir, and the approach at that time, when I went there about 12 years back, was from Thailand. This is on the border between Cambodia and Thailand. Many of these temples are Buddhist temples today, but when built, they were built to the Hindu god called Shiva or the Hindu god Vishnu. So how many gods are there in Hinduism? According to one early story, 600 BCE, the conversation goes, how many gods are there in Hinduism? And the answer is a formulaic phrase. It's like saying a Brazilian, a zillion. And the answer is 330 million. 330 million? Okay, give or take. Are you sure? 330. Really? 33? Are you sure? 6. Really? 3. Are there 3 gods? No. 1.5. What? It's 1, but it's 330 million. It points to the ideas that you find in Hindu texts that God is beyond number, beyond gender. God is male, female, half female, beyond gender, and beyond human thinking, that the Supreme Being is absolutely ineffable. Having said that, the texts also go on to say later on that it takes shape as animal, male, female, and comes down to earth as incarnation. So the 3 main deities in Hinduism, whom I've spoken of today, one was Durga, the goddess slaying the buffalo demon. Second, this is a temple to Shiva. and I'll go on to a temple to Vishnu. Today, the Angkor flag, the Cambodian flag, flies over the Previhir temple, the Shiva temple. It's located in a strategic point on the Thai-Cambodian border, and every now and then there are skirmishes. It is totally closed off to human being, to all of us visitors. And you can see this. It's huge complex built to the Hindu god, Lord of the mountain peak. And that's why it was built on top of the mountain. And you find the Cambodian flag, the nationalistic symbol. Because there was no lake here, what you find here is a temple tank. The water bodies are very, very popular here. And so in springs and in rivers, you find the various Hindu gods etched out. This is Kabal Spain near Angkor. The last part of my talk on Angkor. Angkor Wat is near Siem Reap, Cambodia. The word Angkor is from the Sanskrit word Nagara, which only means city, and Wat means garden, Vatika. Today, it's a Buddhist temple, but when built, it was built to the Hindu god Vishnu. This is the same god who was reclining on the snake, Ananta. It was built by Suryavarman, sun king. So the word Suryavarman, like Louis XIV, means sun king. Angkor Wat is the largest temple in the world today, Hindu temple. But today it's Buddhist. It adorns the national flag. You find Angkor beer, and then there is Angkor on the police uniforms, the tour guides, departure cards, arrival cards, boarding passes, and so on. This temple faces west and has 3 floors. The model, likely as not, was an 8th century temple from South India called Vaikunta Perumal Temple. God, the God of heaven, that's the translation. It's the only other temple apart from Angkor Wat, which is west facing and 3 floors, but about 3 to 4 centuries before Angkor Wat. Well, this temple in India is very small. Angkor Wat is nothing like this. Yes, the basic plan is there, but everything else about Angkor, it's on steroids. It is huge. It is enormous. And again, like this temple, which is called God of Heaven, this too is built shaped like heaven, because heaven in Hindu mythology has a river around it. And it's a piece of beauty and bliss in the middle. And here we have a moat in the middle, and right surrounding the Angkor Wat. And here you see, of course, that it's a Buddhist temple today. It was built by Suryavarman, a portrait of him on the southern walls. And just to give you an example of what I meant by the sun in the Hindu temples in India, and here I'll conclude with this. During one of my sabbaticals in 2005, I was there at sunrise every morning. And the sun would rise closer and closer to the central tower. And on spring equinox, bang, it comes directly behind the central tower. This is not my research. I just took pictures of it for pedagogical work. It had actually been predicted earlier by 3 graduate students from the University of Michigan, who had published it in an article in Science in 1975, showing that the latitude and the longitude of Angkor Wat was such that, like many other Hindu temples, the sun would rise behind the central tower on spring and autumn equinoxes. So here's the sun moving closer and closer. And then, like the Sun Temple in Gujarat, Here too, it rises behind the central tower. The measurements of the causeways and the moats were taken into consideration by these 3 grad students who had never been to either India or to Cambodia. And they eventually, when they published it, showed that the measurements come close to the Hindu calendrical years, the cycles of time in a Hindu calendar, starting with the Golden Age, going down to the Iron Age. And it was kind of quite mind-blowing that the measurements are so exact. The 3 grad students, by the way, one of them became a professor of astronomy, one of history of science, the other one of art. We saw all these monuments. They were temples of piety, but sites of piety, but sites of power. A small shrine would do, but these temples were built huge. And they were built to last. But like sand drawings or like columns, these are the rice drawings we draw outside our homes every day. They too will go off in a minute. Impermanence is part of our culture. And yes, these drawings are done on roads. These are on roadways. We draw them every morning and 10 minutes later, a truck goes over them. But that doesn't stop you from creating a work of beauty. And so too, while the temples were built to be permanent, one has to remember that in Hindu thinking, impermanence, like this huge one on a roadway, which took a half hour to make, and half an hour later it's gone because some cycle has gone over it. But that's the way of life. It doesn't stop you from creating that moment of beauty when you do it. You see it right here, the woman drawing, and you see the truck, the bus coming on. It'll go right over it in a few minutes. And a temple tower, it's South Indian, straight, angular at the back. And that picture to me kind of summarized what my talk was about today. This permanence or intended permanence on one hand through these giant prestige temples and the fleeting moments of beauty that you built through the kola. Thank you.
Laura?
Thank you so much for having me over, and I apologize I took more time.
Oh, no, it's lovely. Laura, if you'd like to unmute, do you want to make any comments? Unmute, Laura. Laura, can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go.
I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed this, and really, I learned a lot of things as I expected I would, and I'm sure there are going to be people here who have questions for you, so I'll give them a chance to do that now. And I'm
willing to stay as long as you want. I really apologize for taking more time.
Oh,
and if you can't get to the questions today, if you email them, I'll be happy to answer them.
We have time. We have time. So I would just let people just remind you, if you're asking a question, unmute yourself first. So.
All right, Karen Mary, I see your hand if you'd like to unmute.
I was just wondering if the giant temple of Borobudur in Indonesia was originally built as a Hindu temple. It's Buddhist now, or if it's in any way historically related to Angkor Wat.
Oh, great question. First, it was built as a Buddhist temple. But the second question is more complex about relationship to Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat itself interestingly, is closer to the Hindu vocabulary in temple building. But there are many temples right around Angkor Wat, even earlier than Angkor Wat, which are built more like pyramids. And I didn't have time to show you some of them today. They really look like more like the Mexican Mayan temples, like like Borobudur, and more like pyramidical in structure. And so the people in Southeast Asia use their own agency in kind of being innovative in temples. So many of the temples right around Angkor Wat share the same architectural vocabulary with Borobudur, which, however, was a Buddhist temple. But the lines between, and the word Hindu, of course, was not used there. They said followers of Vishnu, Vaishnava, followers of Shiva, Shaiva, or Bauddha, Buddhist. And the lines between all of these were very fluid. And depending on the patronage of the king, one day it would be Vishnu, right? And the next day it'll be Buddhist. But Borobudur was definitely a Buddhist temple right from the beginning.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Narayana, we have a question here from our Oak Room at Okamek. No, that's you. Go ahead. Your turn.
My turn. My question concerns the representation, the figural representation of architectural representation.
Sorry, I can't hear properly.
Speak right in to the microphone.
Can you hear me? Okay. My question concerns, you compared Buddhism and of course Hinduism, and the representation of three religions, especially in their main figure, God figure. The Buddhist figure is particularly the one that I'd like to know how comes that its main figure is seated, crouching with crossed legs. That's how the Buddhist Buddha is represented. Christ, of course, is the crucifixion. Now, as far as Hinduism is involved, I didn't see a singular figure that represents in a particular position or action the religion as such. Is there a reason for that they are different representations of the God figures in Hinduism?
Julie, can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, it was kind of talking about with the different religions and the positions or how they were seated or cross-legged or what that represents.
I got part of it as to you. He didn't see a single figure in Hinduism doing what?
In Christianity, the God figure is usually represented mainly by the crucified Jesus. In Buddhism, it's the sitting Buddha with crossed leg, which is the main figure that represents Buddhism. I didn't see a similar single figure in Hinduism that represents Hinduism.
Thank you. That's a very, very perceptive question and a very important one. Thank you for that question. And that kind of tells you the diversity of Hinduism. There's no single figure here that all Hindus look to and say, him or her. There are multiple gods and there are multiple human beings. There's no single founder for this tradition. And even today, not that I would say the legal system knows best, but according to the Hindu law, a Hindu is anyone who's domiciled in the territories of India, but is not a Christian, Muslim, or Zoroastrian. So by default, you become Hindu. So there is no single human being, although there are many, many traditions within Hinduism, and every one of them would look, or many of them at least, would look to a particular teacher whom they hold to be semi-divine, like the Buddha, and then as symbolic of their tradition. And that's why anything I've said about saying the Hindus believe it, take it with lots of salt, not just a grain of salt. It's like the diversity of Hinduism is just amazing.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I had one question. I was really intrigued by these step wells, which I was not aware of before. And I take it you're saying that there's sort of a symbolic significance to them, because that's you're delving deep into yourself. Is that what that I?
Yes,
that a little bit?
though when they were built, they were really built more with practical purposes.
Okay.
More to remind you directly of the divine, and also to have a cool place to hang out during the hot summer days. But it was beautifully carved. We don't know, however, if how many people were there, royalty or who else was allowed to use it. Likely many people were. But Laura, there's a whole talk on just step wells if you want. Free and compulsory, I'll give it to you anytime.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
This has been wonderful. I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
Oh, David Hickey, go ahead.
Hi, David.
Hi, Vasu. How are you? I enjoyed this very much. I wanted to know if you have your monograph on Angkor Wat ready. Has it been published?
Not yet. Oh,
Not yet?
the story of many academics. Too many committee meetings.
Yes, I hear you. Well, if you do, please let us know so that we
Sure,
can.
I have many
look for it.
articles and I'll send them all your way on Angkor.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you so much. It's fascinating. And the images you used were very good today. Thank you.
Thank you. Almost all of them except for the maps and the charts are my pictures.
Yes.
Okay, so is that it now, Julie?
I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much once again. And it's a privilege to be with all of you today. Thank you.
Wonderful. We'll look forward to
Thank
having you here.
Bye.